Okay, I'm hoping you can see this, but the honey on the right and the honey on the left are slightly different varieties, but they're within 15 miles of each other. The honey on the right is partially granulated. It's just starting to granulate. And you can see how it's kind of cloudy, hopefully, in this video. To the naked eye, it looks pretty clean cut, pretty clear. On the left, you can see it's just a very consistent color, and the light's shining through it pretty easily. That honey has been, re-liquefied fairly recently using one of the three types of methods I'm going to show you. And then what I want to show you too is a glass jar. Now, glass jars aren't made to be exactly, they can't be made to be as clear as that plastic, and that's why they've fallen out of favor, is because it looks a little cloudier than the plastic. This is the same honey, but in two different containers. You can see how and like I said, the one on the right is a different variety than the one on the left. The one on the left comes from sage, basically, and the one on the right comes from alfalfa and yellow sweet clover and white sweet clover. One other thing I wanted to mention about reheating honey. I've got 2 glass containers, 2 plastic containers. Doesn't matter what kind of plastic container you get, it's going to cause you problems when you reheat it. If you do it very slowly and at very low temperature, you'll be okay. But, which is the way I recommend. But even if you're doing it slowly, and the temperature gets up, say, above 103 to 105 degrees, what's going to happen with these plastic containers is that they're going to sag a little bit. Sometimes the bottom, which is concave here, becomes convex and you can't set it down anymore. The advantage to a plastic bottle, obviously, is that you can squeeze the honey out, where you can't with a glass jar. But reheating honey in a glass jar is the best way to do it, period. Not just because the jar doesn't flatten, but because when you reheat plastic, or when you heat plastic, it actually off-gases things that are absorbed into the honey. Another thing is that when reheating honey, always keep the lid on. It's not going to create a huge pressure where it vents, but honey is what's called hygroscopic. It absorbs water out of the air. And when you got it in a pan of warm water, or around any water, or even just open to the outside air, it's going to absorb water. When honey absorbs water and becomes more moisture laden than what it's supposed to be, it can ferment and go bad on you. So if you keep a sealed container of honey, it'll never go bad on you. But if you leave it unsealed, it can. And it depends on what kind of honey that you have as to when that fermentation will occur. But bees actually take water out of honey down to 18% or less, and then they put a wax seal on it, just like Grandma used to do, and on her jelly. They put a wax seal on it so that moisture can no longer be transferred from the air to the honey. So let's start re-liquefying. Okay, the first method, and I'm going to go through these methods in the safest, best ways possible for the honey, not for efficiency's sake. So the least efficient method is usually the one that works the best, but takes the longest time and the most money and the most effort. So you can see I'm filling a sink with hot water. Now, hot water out of the tap is usually set between 125 and 140 degrees. However, heat is absorbed by both the pipes, and if it's even gone through, you can see the water steaming a little bit there. If it's in a sink at 140 degrees, by the time honey absorbs the heat, it's no longer going to be at 140 degrees, and you're safe to put even like a 1-pound jar here in the sink. And you can see the jar is starting to shake. You only want to fill the water up. You want to get it close to the level of honey in all of these methods. And the reason is because you want good coverage on the honey. With full jars, it's easier to re-liquefy them. Empty jars or half-empty jars are a little harder. But honey weighs 12 pounds to the gallon, whereas water only weighs 8, so it will always stay on the bottom of the sink, or water, or whatever. So this. Okay, the next method is simply to put your system in a double boiler over the stove. What you want to do is try to get a basket. This is a vegetable steamer that will support the jar above the heating element, whether it's electric or gas. And then you only want, like I say, if the water gets to where it's kind of steaming a little bit, you're too hot. You can always put a thermometer on there, but I literally, on a medium-sized burner, keep the flame as low as it'll go. You know, as low as you can get it without it going out. I keep it that low over the course of a couple hours, and I usually don't have a problem with it. It never gets really too hot. So at least, you know, on my setup, you're gonna have to experiment with yours. But with this method, this is probably the quickest of the slow and steady methods of re-liquefying honey. But it's also, you know, you can't forget about it. So set a timer, you know, whatever. It's going to take a couple hours even at this. If it's solidly granulated, it's going to take a couple hours. If it's just starting to granulate, it may only take 20 to 30 minutes. But this is a good method too. And anytime you can support your honey above the heating elements directly off of a pan, you're doing good right there. Okay, the next method. Now this is one of the best methods, is to heat your honey in a crock pot. So I got my crock pot. This is a pretty standard crock pot. I think they're all pretty much just like this. Not this shape necessarily or this size, but as far as the heating element, they heat the same way. If you can see the thermometer over here, it's at 127 degrees. Just went to 129. So once it gets to 120 or above, what you want to do is click it over to warm and take the lid off. And then just set your honey in there. Again, I use this basket to keep it up off the heating element. And in this case, I don't have quite enough water to get to the honey level, so I'm going to put the rest of this water in there. Now I'm right at the honey level. So this method won't take much longer than the stove method, and it's safer and it's easier because there's a more constant, consistent heat with a crock pot than there is with the stove. Plus, you know, you don't have an open flame. Okay, the next method is outside. You can see my flag, it's going pretty hard. So this method is hit and miss, but it works pretty well if you're not too worried, you know, about or if you don't have the time to reliquefy your honey. Take it to work with you, put it in your vehicle, and let the sun heat it. Solar heat. Most cars typically get to around 120 degrees. I'd say on an 80 to a 90 degree day, at the most 120 degrees. So it's a pretty safe method of heating your honey. Now if it's going to be 100 degrees outside, you don't really want to put it in the car or truck. But you can see I just have it on the dash. It was hard for me to tell if that was coming through. So you can see it there on the dash. Leave it in there for 4 or 5 hours and it should be reliquefied. So again, this doesn't really work on a cloudy day or a cool day, so it doesn't work in the winter, but it does work pretty much where I live 9 months out of the year. So you can find a day where you know, you can reheat your honey in the car. So that is the solar method of reheating honey. Okay, the honey's been in there about 15 minutes or so, and what I did is I just put both of them in this crock pot method, and you can see the temperature's gone down to 122 in about 15 minutes. And this honey, you can see, is still pretty viscous. But it's also almost clear. This is almost done. This jar here still has a long way to go. And then one thing I wanted to tell you, no matter what method you use, you should always just take it and just kind of roll it slowly as you're re-liquefying honey. You only have to do this every hour maybe, or 30 minutes to an hour maybe. Just do that and it'll get everything kind of mixed up in there and get any granules that are on the side of the glass or plastic, either one. See you can now see that part broke away, so it's mixing up. The granulated honey and the liquefied honey is mixing now. So it's actually working pretty good. The jar is not even close to hot to the touch. Okay everyone, well it's been I think about close to almost 10 hours that I've had this in here. On the warm setting on this, it stays almost always 117 to 118 degrees, which is perfect for re-liquefying honey. Okay, what I want to show you is different viscosities. So the honey on the left you can see is a little lighter than that. And considering that these two were produced within 20 miles of each other, this is a clover and alfalfa honey. It's around a lot of alfalfa fields. There's a lot of yellow sweet clover and white sweet clover blooming in the distance, but it actually has hundreds of different sources of nectar in it. This has an area where there are 0 agricultural crops, and it's mostly sage and salvia and some cactus in here, things like that. You can see the difference just in the color. Okay, now on the internet there was a video I saw from a very well-meaning person trying to explain how you can tell the difference between real honey and fake honey, and he used a method where he turned this over, and one that he knew was real honey versus one that he knew was not real honey, he thought anyway. He did this test. What I'm going to do is I'm going to turn this over, and there's a little bit of gap at the top. There's a little bit, you can see that the bubbles come to here, and then from there to there there's air, there's a space. So when I turn them over, I'm going to do it at the same time, you're going to see the bubbles travel up at different rates. So you can see how fast this goes up. This bubble's already at the top. Look at that. This one's about halfway. All that represents is that the chemical composition of the honey is from different nectar sources, and that this is a more viscous honey than this. That's all that means. That doesn't mean that this is fake and this is real. So it is true that if you get a fake source of honey that has been cut with, or sugar syrup or whatever, what have you, that it is going to be a lot runnier than this. But I also have a jar of honey from Mexico that I know to be real, and it's extremely liquid too. Now the temperature also matters too. Okay, the large jar is the same as this. Is a 12-ounce jar and this is a 16-ounce jar. This has been rewarmed, so I just pulled it out of the crock pot. It's 118 degrees or around there, so this is around 68 degrees, and this of course is 68 degrees as well. So these two are the same temperature, but this is very warm. So I'm going to start from this side because it's usually more viscous than the other, and you'll see how much quicker that air bubble went up. I mean, it was very, very quick. Quicker than either one of them. That's just because it's a lot warmer. So, honey gets less, a little runnier as you warm it up. Okay, so those are 3 methods that you can use. You can use a double boiler like we used in actuality. You can use solar or just hot tap water. So, which is another kind of double boiler, but those are 3 tried and true methods. Of course, the double boiler method we can use on the stove or in the crock pot. So there was 2 different double boiler methods. But that's a good way to reliquefy your honey. So these are all reliquefied. This one has our label on it. And then one other note about this honey here is that foamy stuff that you see is actually beeswax that got through our strainer. So at the end of our big jars, wax always floats on top of honey. So typically when I start draining or filling jars, you don't get any honey or any wax in your honey until the very last jar. But that's what that is. And some people really like it, and some people, don't know it don't know what it is, so they don't care for it, but that's actually beeswax. And hope you enjoyed the video. Moreoverly, I hope you found it informative. Give me a like or subscribe to my channel if you want. Keith, and we're Honeybee Honey. Thanks.